I am really nervous to talk about Star Trek Voyager.
You should be. No, I'm excited. I
Really?
I see this as a show with a lot of potential, and I'm kind of eager to see it be squandered.
Well, you won't be disappointed.
Okay.
In that. I mean, it will be disappointing, but you won't be disappointed in seeing it squander its potential.
Okay.
What potential do you see in the show?
I think this has a lot of so kind of the main themes of all of the different series. The original series, we are dealing with exploring the frontier. The Federation is a power. It's making its strides a little deeper into space, but space is still pretty dangerous. There are still a lot of things that they don't know and understand. Okay, Next Generation comes in, and that's a much more settled corner of the galaxy. The Federation is very powerful during that. Probably in Insurrection, for example, they talk about how, yes, we're smelling blood on the Federation. By the time that, and towards the end of Next Generation is the era that blood is on the Federation, but at the very beginning, it's the highest point that we've ever seen it. DS9 is dealing with powers outside of the Federation, and the Federation starting to get some serious ideological challenges. Mm-hmm. I can see Voyager as being how one keeps one's morality and keeps Federation values away from the Federation. In other words, this could be a very character is what you are in the dark kind of a show, especially considering with some of the conversations between Janeway and the Caretaker. Oh, children need to grow up. They need to be on their own. Janeway and all of her crew have been under the aegis of the Federation this entire time. They're in a place where when they meet Neelix, he doesn't even know what the Federation is. Nobody's heard of this. To say I'm Captain Janeway of the United Federation of Planets, that's a great sounding title, but nobody respects it. They're just one little ship with no one to protect them. And how can they still... I can see a lot of challenges to the Federation viewpoint that they could very easily get away with. And can they still keep... For example, they talk about the Prime Directive. We barely heard that in Deep Space Nine. It's interesting to hear it mentioned again. And what is the incentive to keep the Prime Directive when they are so far from home? They have such a serious journey ahead of them. And what if they get in a situation where violating the Prime Directive will allow them to get home? Yes, in this episode, they decide to go for the Prime Directive over their own comfort. They choose the needs of the many over the needs of the few, but this is their first week. What is going to happen in Season 5 when they're faced with that challenge?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I
guess that's what I see the show as being able to... I feel like this is not going to be as thoughtful of a version of that as I kind of want there to be.
It will not be. And I'll get this out of the way. I like Star Trek Voyager. Mm-hmm. It is not objectively a good show. I don't think. And I also don't think that it's, I like shows that are more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
I think this is the first Star Trek show that is not true of.
Okay.
And it's interesting to hear you say that you think that they were upholding the Prime Directive by destroying the Caretaker array, for example. Well, I actually disagree.
Whether they were or not, they were keeping the Prime Directive. That was something they discussed and dealt with, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. I want to kind of approach the Star Trek Voyager podcasts a little differently because I never really brought up things that were happening in the future with the Next Generation, primarily because it didn't matter. There wasn't really any sort of serialization or mm-hmm. long-term storytelling going on. And I very deliberately gave you almost no information about what was going to be coming on Deep Space Nine, because one of the joys of Deep Space Nine is seeing that 7-year story unfold. And so with Star Trek Voyager, I want to handle it a little differently. I think that I want to start out talking about Caretaker, the pilot of Star Trek Voyager, by saying that, A, it's about 4 different shows. The show had 4 different showrunners over its 7 mm-hmm. years, which is a lot. It never really, I think, comes into itself. I don't think the show ever really has a good grasp on why it exists other than to make Paramount and UPN money. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that in a cynical way. I think that the show is still a worthy Star Trek show. I think that for all of its faults and all of its messes that we will see, I do think that they were trying to do something. And if they weren't always completely successful at it, or mostly not successful at it, I don't know that we can really criticize the show for not going in the direction that we think it should have gone. One of the things that I find is, I mean, I want to get this out of the way really quickly, is that, you talking about, oh, well, this is one ship in the, a part of the galaxy that doesn't know about the Federation, doesn't know about Starfleet. That is true. And that is something that the show doesn't forget. But it's also not a driving force of the show. It's not something that the show is very interested in dealing with very much. And really what it boils down to is that Star Trek Voyager is warmed over Next Generation.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I think that Voyager has a lot of good episodes. And I think that there are, especially and this is kind of a controversial statement, but I think the Brown and Braga run seasons of the show are the best. Because he was trying to do something interesting, and he had a lot of experience on Star Trek, and he was chomping at the bit to kind of put his own stamp on it. And it's the kind of show that, again, it's going to be interesting to cover it in this kind of format, because frankly, I don't know that a lot of people have done it before. There's a website out there called Jammers Reviews, which covered Star Trek Voyager, I believe, when it was on the air. But aside from that, I'm not really aware of any, episode by episode coverage of Star Trek Voyager. I'm sure it's out there, but I just don't know of it. So it is the kind of thing where you look at it and you say, where is this going to go? Where do you think it's going to go? Is, I think, going to be very different than where it does go.
Yeah, because so far it seems like they have a very specific main quest. Their main quest is they've been launched into this other part of the galaxy. They need to get home. The best clue that they have is that there is another being like the Caretaker. And so the meta plot will be kind of figuring out where this other caretaker is. If anybody knows about that, they'll be going from planet to planet, kind of asking around. You can see, if this is a video game, you can see how it would be structured. That would be your main quest, and then the others are every episode would be a little side quest, for example. And I guess I'm getting the sense by the look on your face, it's not really that invested in the meta plot.
No.
And see, now I almost get the sense that the reason they're putting this in the Delta Quadrant is not, again, to make statements about, how do you keep civilization when you're far from civilization, which is a theme that's been treated by so much literature and TV and movies, but still it could make its own stamp on that, especially given that, Star Trek is so focused on a very particular morality. How do we keep that morality when nobody's going to notice whether we are or not, and it may be even harmful to our overall mission?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's I want to ground the conversation, by going back to Caretaker, because that is why we're here. And I think that one of the things that's difficult about Star Trek Voyager is that the show was really, I think, hampered by the fact that Deep Space Nine was not popular on the network. Well, not the network side, but the studio side. Rick Berman famously has said that he basically could not control Ira Stephen Bear. That Bear was doing whatever he wanted to do on Deep Space Nine, and it turned out that it was usually very wonderful. But it definitely wasn't the type of Star Trek show that people were used to seeing, and it was a very sort of challenging Star Trek show in a lot of ways. It really upended a lot of the tropes and a lot of what people expected from a show that had Star Trek in the title. And Star Trek Voyager was really designed partly to counteract that. They're back on a ship. They are part of the reason why they wanted to put it in the Delta Quadrant. This whole setup of them being sent 70,000 light years away from the Federation was to get them away from known space, to get them away from that, and to go back to that really original series idea of being out in
before.
Exactly. The speech that Janeway gives at the end of the episode. And
it's almost a reboot in that way then.
It is. But the other half of that, of course, is that they do try and dirty it up a little bit with the Maquis stuff and things like that. But again, they almost completely jettison that at the end of the episode. And so it's a show that has very, very, it has tendencies that are at war with each other, and I think you see that in this pilot even. I mean, like what you said about the Caretaker, the other Caretaker that's out there.
Yeah.
You take that as, and we just came off Deep Space Nine, so you're taking that as, oh, they're going to be on this quest to find the next Caretaker. No, it's not that at all.
Yeah.
They put that in the episode because they wanted to give themselves an out in case the show did badly and they wanted to send it back to the Alpha Quadrant.
Okay.
Like, it's that kind of stuff. It's a much more... Star Trek Voyager is a much more calculated show than Deep Space Nine ever was in that way.
Okay. Yeah. So in other words, it's the end of the season. We're going to be canceled. All right. Well, we'll just make a final episode where the Caretaker appears and...
No, I mean, I actually mean like if the show had been doing badly, like
Okay.
they would have sent the ship back to the Alpha Quadrant.
and then dealt with. Okay.
And that's where the show would take place.
yeah.
They never do that, but they could have done that.
Okay, I get that. Yeah.
It's a show that is trying to both do interesting things with Star Trek and trying to play it a little too safe.
Yeah, because I can definitely see that. Again, it seems like they're trying to create because of how well Deep Space Nine did the world building. And I mean, beginning this, I was really excited. I'm really excited for a new Star Trek show. There is still a Christmas present feeling about this. And even the world, especially in the Alpha Quadrant sections at the beginning, in the first part of the episode, it feels very lived in. I mean, we're back at Quarks for a scene, even when this is the first time we see a penal colony, for example, but we've heard so much about them that it feels like, all right, this is another thing that, the talk about the Maquis and all that feels like when, by the way, was this,
So here's the story on the Maquis, and this is something
Okay.
that I never really brought up because I wanted to get to Voyager to talk about it. The Maquis was created for the pilot of Star Trek Voyager. Like they seeded it throughout the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine because of this reason. And again, it's one of those things where you see the show at odds with itself, at war with itself, because they created this entire, sort of convoluted backstory of the Maquis with the Cardassian treaty with the Federation and the whole Eddington stuff and all that stuff, really, with Ensign Rowe, and they created it for Star Trek Voyager to set up a way to have conflict between the crew. And what do they do at the end of the pilot? They put them all in Starfleet uniforms, and they never really talk about it again.
And and especially because not only are they they seem a little more comfortable on it. They seem to very easily put aside their differences and, this is bigger than. Because let's face it, the Maquis and Federation conflicts are utterly irrelevant this far from home. It doesn't really matter who owns what planet at this point because they're 75 years away from their planet. So, and also, for example, the half Klingon woman.
B'Elanna Torres. She
and Kim start to get along pretty well towards the end of the episode, and she's at least going to be. Chakotay and Paris become friends towards the end, and they're going to have their little conflicts bits from time to time. But there is not as much friction in that.
It feels really weird that they would have set this up.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have just had them be some colonists or something. And to me, I mean, I'm not saying that they completely jettison the Maquis stuff. The show never forgets that the Maquis existed. It's not like they retcon it out of existence and never talk about it again. The show does deal with it at certain points, but it's not the kind of thing where you look at it and say, why did they set this up?
Yeah.
They obviously wanted to, or it seems to me that they wanted to set up this sort of really strong philosophical difference. They really wanted people that were, fundamentally at odds with the philosophy of the Federation. And they get rid of that very quickly. And if they just wanted some people that were not in Starfleet, they could have done it another way.
To crooks or whatever, bandits.
Right. And so it just feels kind of strange that, and a part of it too is that I think with the pilot, there's 9 main characters in this show. That's a lot of main characters. They deliberately, as I understand it, didn't really spend any time giving any of them a personality in the pilot except for Tom Paris and Janeway. And I don't really, I mean, they wanted to make it sort of this action adventure romp and these kind of things. And it's all very, like, I don't think this is a very good pilot. I mean, in certain ways it is, and in certain ways it's not.
Well, I get, not to cross promote to our other podcast tuning in that much, but 9 characters. That's the number of characters in Firefly, for example. Now, which wasn't that many years after this, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, this was 1995 and Firefly was 2002.
Okay, yeah, so 7 years later. I guess that's, enough difference, but I think Firefly does a better job at giving us very clear snapshots of who these characters are in their couple of scenes, and then over the rest of the episodes, deepens that characterization. But, and partially this is because I saw Firefly several times, but yeah, there's Harry Kim, who's nice and plays the clarinet. There's Torres, who's fiery and she feels ashamed of her Klingonness. Paris is pretty much Ensign Rowe except a blonde dude. And
interestingly enough, I don't know if you remember this. You probably don't because you're bad with faces. But the actor who plays Tom Paris was the same actor who played Locarno in The First Duty from that eepisode of TNG.
Okay, I knew he was really familiar.
And he was supposed to be Locarno.
Okay.
But for some reason, I think Paramount...
See, because that makes sense, yeah.
Well, I think Paramount lawyers, if I remember this correctly, I think the Paramount lawyers said that if they used the character of Locarno in Star Trek Voyager, they would have to pay a royalty to the author who wrote The First Duty, like every single episode of Star Trek Voyager, which seems weird to me, but, I'm sure it's true. So they jettisoned that idea and created a new character.
Yeah. I mean, even if it was open to that, give that writer a good enough lawyer and they will get something for, yeah. Okay. But yeah, there, and again, part of it is a pilot and there's a lot of stuff, and the pilot is very invested in the mystery of what is going on this array, on this planet, why they're there. And so it does spend a lot of time actually on its plot. And so the characters do get slightly downplayed in favor of that. I don't know how well the show is going to end up using its ensemble. I mean,
not well.
So it's not like we'll get Janeway episodes and Tuvok episodes and Torres episodes, and all of that like we did with Next Gen.
I don't know that I want to go too much into it. I mean that I will not say that we do get those kind of episodes, but. Well, let's talk about who's showrunning this, because I think that's kind of the elephant in the room. So Michael Piller co-created Star Trek Voyager with Jerry Taylor and Rick Berman. And, Rick Berman was still not super involved in the creative side a little bit at this point, but he certainly was much more involved in like Enterprise, for example. He like wrote episodes with Brian Braga and stuff.
So this might be more like, yes, well, you need a blonde dude for the audience to identify with kind of thing.
Yeah. And kind of coming up with some of the backstory of Voyager and things like that. But if you remember back from our Next Generation podcast, Michael Piller was the man who came on as showrunner in the 3rd season of TNG and turned it into a character-based show.
Yeah.
And that was the right choice for the show. Now, you look at Star Trek Voyager and you say, okay, Michael Piller co-created Deep Space Nine, and he showrun that for 2 years. Then he moved over to showrunning Voyager. And so you kind of have to put it in that context where, okay, Michael Piller is showrunning this show.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What are we going to look out for? And at least from this pilot, I don't see a lot of Michael Piller in it, which is strange.
Yeah,
for someone who was so focused on character, and again, I think that deliberately so they decided to downplay the character elements in favor of an action adventure story. But that's not where Michael Piller's strengths lie as a writer, and so the action adventure part of the pilot just comes across as a little underdeveloped.
Yeah, and also if the show isn't as interested in its characters, then why are there 9 of them in a way? Like if it's going for a more original series where so we're going to have Janeway, Tuvok, and Paris, and that's going to be the trio around which the series is run, and then every so often we'll check in with Torres or we'll check in with Harry Kim or whatever, but they're pretty much treated as Uhura or Chekhov was. They'll have their little side adventures. And then, maybe you only need 6 characters or whatever. But if you're not interested in a very large cast who are going to develop and they're going to be a motley family, as was the case with TNG or Deep Space Nine, again, why are there so many of them?
I think that's a good question, and I don't know what the answer is, and I think that keep that in mind. I think is all I'll say about that.
Yeah,
because it is possible that the show is going to go in that direction.
Okay,
and we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, because right now, what's the difference between Chakotay and Tom Paris besides their race?
Well, yeah, and I want to talk about the choice on the pilot to really have it be told from the point of view of Tom Paris, which I think is kind of strange. And I'm not really sure why they made that choice. I get the impression, or the kind of my understanding or my theory about it, is that they wanted to. Tom Paris is the audience stand-in character.
Yeah.
He is the everyman who's not a Starfleet guy. He was, he was in the academy and was cashiered out because he accidentally killed someone. Then he went to the Maquis and was arrested during his first raid. Now he's in a penal colony. He's a fuck up essentially.
Yeah.
And he's got a lot of daddy issues surrounding his admiral father in Starfleet. Okay, I buy all that. But for a show like this to have the pilot episode be told from his point of view is just a little weird.
Well, it seems like, again, I mean, this is some obvious latent sexism in it, I would assume, because it almost...
True.
Again, Rick Berman is here. It almost feels like, yes, well, it was the last show we had helmed by a black man, and now, all right, we need to have a woman captain. That's fine. That's the next logical progression, and I really do like that decision. But we nobody watches DS9, and we really want to hook people, and they're not going to want to watch a female-led show. And so, again, let's have the blonde white dude be the. I mean, that almost seems like and again, you're right. Tom Paris isn't the hero. He's not this great, super confident hotshot. He does some things.
He thinks he is.
He thinks he is, but he's of that. I'd say it's more he very desperately wants to be and hopes he is, but knows that he's had, whether he attributes it to luck or, he is a fuck up. Whatever he attributes his downfall, he does know that he has had a downfall.
Yeah. And I think that, interestingly enough, I mean, to move aside from Tom Paris for a minute, I think that one of the other weird things about the pilot is that it doesn't give any effort in trying to convince us that the characters that die are important.
Yeah.
It's very, very transparently done. The first officer, Tom Paris gets this whole big introduction. Janeway gets this whole big introduction. Chakotay, B'Elanna, and Tuvok open up the episode, open up the pilot of the show. Those are the first three characters that we see. They are obviously being developed. And then we see the first officer. He basically has two lines and then he's killed.
Yeah.
We meet the doctor and he's killed. We meet the Betazoid ensign, whose name I don't even remember. And the only real beat that she has is Tom Paris hitting on her, then she's killed. And I would have liked, I'm not going down a road of trying to fix the episode, but I almost would have liked to have seen more of an effort to have established those as real people and then have it be surprising that they were going to be killed.
For example, I thought for a while that Harry Kim was going to be killed, that, okay, they're setting him up to be the red shirt and it's going to be very sad. And for every so often, especially the bit Janeway has where she realizes I barely knew him. I talked to his mom. He played the clarinet, again, learning things about him and realizing that there are so many people around her that I think this is an interesting note for her character. It's not that she hasn't gotten to know people because, they're below her or because she feels that, she doesn't want to connect in the same way that Picard was a little reluctant to. She just hasn't thought about it. She's been really busy and she regrets that. And if Harry Kim is killed over the course of the episode, he's going to kind of become a symbol and a reason for her to, I need to know who these people are that I'm in charge of. She does specifically have a line that, I'm their superior officer. They're under my care.
Yeah.
She is taking a kind of in loco parentis. And so I thought that's where Harry Kim was going to go, but no, they were characterizing him because he's a character.
Right.
And for, again, going back to Firefly, one of the characters turns out to be an agent and he's killed at the end of the episode, and he's given some characterization too. I thought they would have done that kind of a thing. The Doctor, you're right, he's hostile, he has two lines, and then he's gone. We don't even, I don't think, get a name.
No, we don't. We don't at all. And one of the things that I think is most interesting about the Star Trek Voyager pilot is the fact that, this is not a typical... It's not a typical one because, let's remember in the pilot of TNG, Picard was just coming on as captain of the Enterprise. So was Riker. In Deep Space Nine, Sisko was going to Deep Space Nine. And in Voyager, She's already captain of the ship. She's already got her crew. They've already got this working relationship. And then I don't know that the episode really has enough depth or goes into it at least at all that she has really lost her first officer that she would have relied on. We don't know how long they were working together, but assumedly it was a while at least. Things like that. Which feel kind of rote and like by the numbers.
I got the sense almost that this was a new ship for her. Not, it wasn't her first day, but maybe this is 2 months in and this is their first really big mission that they've just gotten out of shakedown and then they're going actually. And that was almost the sense I got. But the fact that, we're not sure, and the fact that it doesn't really matter, I think that you're right. That's telling.
Yeah, I think it is telling. And let's talk about Janeway. I think that Janeway she is a really interesting character. I wonder about what you think about her so far.
I'm still obviously she is obviously going to be compared with Kirk, Picard, and Sisko, right? I mean, that's her. As the lead, she's the next captain. She's the I like her. I get the feeling she's the kind of person that people who don't like her call her a bitch a lot. I don't think of her as one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you don't hate women.
No, I don't hate women. I think it's interesting that she's said to come from more of an explicit science background.
Yeah.
That's a difference because, again, Kirk was the all-action. He was a little more of, fisticuffs and in there, and the cowboy. Picard is the diplomat. Sisko is the military strategist. And she's going to, you said at one point the technobabble in Voyager gets and I can already see that. But she's throwing out the technobabble with the best of them in the way that none of the other captains we've seen have been able to do. And again, I think that fits with her personality as somebody who realizes that she's been too busy in order to connect with the people. She is the kind of person who is going to be fascinated by a technical problem, but it will slip her mind to actually deal with the person who's telling her about it.
Yeah, I think all that's right. And there's a couple things that intrigue me about her character. And I want to go on the record as saying that I like Janeway a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't know that her character is always well served by the material that she's given, but I think Kate Mulgrew is.
She definitely elevates.
She's really good in it, and interestingly enough, and this is a side note, she was not the first choice for Janeway, and Genevieve Bujold was given the role.
I'm not sure who.
She's a French Canadian actress. She mostly does movies.
Okay.
I think she's probably in her 70s now.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because she was a big deal. Mm-hmm. She's not as much of a big deal anymore, but she was a big deal back in the 80s and 90s. And it was like a real thing that they wanted to get this movie star to be their captain. And, to his credit, Rick Berman was arguing very strongly against it. He said this woman is not going to be able to handle the rigors of episodic television. You are on set 16, 18, 20 hours a day, 6 days a week for 7 years. There's no time to rehearse. It's very tiring, all of these things, right? And this is a woman who has not, I'm not criticizing Genevieve Bujold. She is a great actress and certainly she's really good in movies, but it's just a different working style, really. And he didn't think that she was equipped to deal with it. And they cast her as Janeway. And I didn't show you this because I didn't want you to get colored by it, but she filmed for 2 days.
Okay.
And there is footage of her as captain. And it's the show would have gone down a very different path if she had been the captain of the show. Kate Mulgrew, and then of course she basically left. She was like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And she just
2 days of
she
it decided,
quit.
Okay.
Right. And Rick Berman likes to crow and say that he was right. he was right, to his credit.
No, give him that one.
Kate Mulgrew came in, she read again, she hit it out of the park. In a sense, I think that she does the best job of any of the actors that have played captains in any of the previous Star Trek shows before in really coming out of the gate very strongly with a fully formed character that feels different and authentic And I like her performance in this episode quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the scene where she's we'll talk about Tuvok, because I know you're very excited to meet Tuvok. But,
yeah, is he going to be in this show? I mean, he comes in the second episode then, right?
Are you kidding?
No, I thought this was one of those where they introduced the rest of the cast in the next one. Tuvok was in this?
You really don't know? Are you serious?
I just don't get why he's the fan favorite.
He's not the fan favorite.
Then why is he the only character I knew?
I don't know. That's why I was so weirded out by it for years. Where did you come up with this? I don't know. Anyway, I think you were reading TV tropes and saw Tuvok on there once, and it just got locked into your head about Star Trek Voyager. But she does a lot of really good work, and I think that the scene with her and Tuvok towards the end of the episode is really strong. I think that the scene that kind of opens the episode after the cold open with her and Tom Paris is really strong. I think that her talking to her boyfriend, fiance, whoever that is really strong stuff.
I really like her interactions with Neelix, where she's just utterly amused by him and trying not to crack a smile at him. I mean, I think that says a lot about her character.
She's wry.
Yeah, that's the exact,
And I like that.
Yeah.
She's kind of a Katharine Hepburn type. But
I can see that.
I like and you know what I like about it also is that, and the show does a really good job with this, I think Janeway is the one thing that this show usually gets really right, in that she is a sort of, she really is sort of a feminist icon, I think, for a lot of Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
And I can see why. And she's a very strong character. She is not, there's no question that she is the captain. She is not really, I don't even want to say that she's not feminized, because that is...
Well, no, because there is the exchange with Kim when he calls her, and that, calling female officers sir is something that's always pricked up my ears, as we've always seen. I know that's a military tradition, and I know it's the intent, I guess, is, don't worry about, whether to go, in the heat of a battle, that's really irrelevant. Just call everybody sir, and it's fine. She's the only one who's actually mentioned anything about that.
Yeah.
And when he suggests calling her ma'am, she says, no, that's in crunch time. Call me captain. That's not insignificant.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite line of Janeway's in the entire episode is, it's not crunch time.
Yeah. And then also towards the end, when she gives the command to Paris, he calls her ma'am, and it's crunch time at that point.
Right. Right. So,
which goes to show, I guess, how much Paris is a little more streetwise isn't quite the word, but he's not quite as green as Harry Kim may be, because again, he recognizes when it's really crunch time, when things need to be serious.
Yeah. Well, Harry Kim, I think, is supposed to be right out of the academy.
Yes, his mother called to make sure he brought his clarinet. I mean, that's all. That's how old Harry Kim is.
People say helicopter parenting is bad in the 21st century. Let's run down the list. Let's get that out of the way. We've already talked about Janeway. We've already talked about Paris. Chakotay, he's a character in the show.
How do we feel about how many jokes Paris makes about Chakotay being Indian? Because
I don't feel good about it.
He made one joke, and I'm like, okay, I'll let that one slide, because maybe I didn't hear it right. It's like when Troy said about her boobs being, and then, then he makes well, can't you people turn into a bird? And I'm like, after, when you consider that the episode which introduced the treaty which created the Maquis was about Native Americans being forced out of their lands, it's very awkward.
I agree with all of that, and I do want to say that I think that Chakotay is one of the more problematic characters Star Trek has ever created.
Yeah,
they never really know what to do with him, and it's never defined exactly what tribe he's from. He's an Indian, and that's all it really goes into, and it's a problem. And I'll just leave it at that.
It's almost like how the characterization of Chekhov was, he's Russian. Except that was 1968, and they were trying to at least say, well, we'll become, we'll unite with Russia. Even that's how united the world is, and okay, give them that pass. It's
a little strange.
Yeah.
We'll leave it aside there. We've already talked about B'Elanna a little bit. She doesn't really have much of a character in this episode. She's half Klingon and she's angry.
And then she feels bad about it.
And then she feels bad about it. That's all we know about her. There's Neelix and Kes, who
I think he's kind of the Quark of this series.
In a way,
he's more, though. He seems much more benign than Quark ever was. I mean, he will be out for himself and for Kes, but I think he's at least genuine and sweet in his own way. Like, I don't think he has any evil hidden agenda. He's not going to screw over the rest of the cast. Now watch if he does. But
I think that's fair, and I don't. I mean, I will say that as little as there is to say about the characters, and we're really just running down the list more to establish them in your mind and in the audience's mind than anything else. But all of the performances, I think, are very good.
Yeah.
This is a very strong cast, and the actor who plays Neelix is even escaping my mind at this point, but he does a very good job with Neelix.
He recognizes that he's
Ethan
the comic.
Phillips.
Okay. He recognizes he's the comic relief, but he doesn't overdo it or ham it up as much as, for example, he would have if this were Next Generation.
And I find it isn't. Yeah, I agree with that, and I find it's kind of interesting that the show is already finding these pairings that sort of work. I mean, you've got Tom Paris and Kim that are sort of becoming friends. You've got
Kim and
B'Elanna. You've got a sort of weird relationship between Tuvok and Neelix. Obviously, Neelix and Kes have a relationship. Yeah. Kes, again, is not much of a character in this episode. She is a little bit of the damsel in distress, and that's about it. And it's a little problematic, but it is what it is.
But I would say she becomes a damsel in distress because of her. I don't consider it the show to be punishing her for her curiosity in a way, like, especially because it's not punishing Janeway for her curiosity, and she ends up on the ship in a way which she will be able to, indulge that. She's going to see she and Neelix kind of stay on the ship because that's the way they're going to have, she's going to see the most stuff by being on the ship. If she wants to see the outside world, she's in a perfect place for that, and she's going to figure out what she kind of does best there.
I think that's right, and we'll just have to see where that goes, of course.
Aren't we told that her people live 9 years, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's only supposed to be 6 months old or something.
Okay.
It's a little strange.
So enough to give her the cushion of she can be there through the end of the series, but if she wants to leave, they can very easily kill her off.
Right. And I think the only other character we haven't mentioned is the Doctor.
Yeah. Now, this is the third time I've seen the actor.
Yeah, okay.
One being First Contact, his cameo, and the other, that episode in DS9 where we see the actual.
Yep.
So this is a very interesting way to get introduced to that character. I don't know if I would have paid that much attention to him if I had... I would have thought he would be a gimmick if I didn't know that he actually became a character.
I think that's probably fair. And he has a gimmick in this episode,
yes.
To be fair. I mean, he has sort of comic relief. He's the, gruff doctor that nobody really cares about because he's not real, because he's a hologram.
Yeah.
I think the show, one of the things, I will say that I think the show does interesting things with him, and that's one area of the show that I really like. So,
yeah, I like his personality. It's just slightly annoyed. Yeah, I don't think he's going... I like that he's not angry or frustrated, but he just has that little edge, And
also... I mean, obviously, we have a little bit of other knowledge of this because of Vic Fontaine from DS9, but it's not really focused on or spoken of. Is he actually a person or not? Right now, he's not. He's the holographic emergency doctor, and he acts like a person because he was programmed to. But there's no indication that he's a sentient being.
Yeah.
So there is that as well.
But and that's fair. But even so, Next Generation had gone into, even with Moriarty, for example, and had dealt with the issues of holograms attaining sentience, and even things like Data, for example. If Data can be considered a person, Next Gen was definitely seeding. Where was DS9 at this point, by the way?
This would have been DS9's third season.
Okay, given why the Maquis is so prominent.
Sorry. Is that right? Yeah, third season.
Okay, yeah. Given that why the Maquis is so prominent still, the Dominion's not even mentioned. I mean, I think it would be funny to they go back home, and they're all ready for to deal with the Maquis once and for all, and nobody even cares because the Dominion War is over and everybody's trying to rebuild Cardassia. That's going to be a mindfuck for them.
Yes. Well, we'll see what happens, won't we?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the actual content of the pilot, because I have some problems with it. I don't think it's as successful as it could be. It's a little slow in parts, and some of the action adventure stuff is not super interesting. And I'm thinking specifically of when they're trying to escape the Ocampan City. That is just, that's not interesting to watch.
Oh no, we got to go back for, okay, this is when they're going to kill Harry Kim. Oh cool, no, they rescued him. Oh, Chakotay's on the stairs. That's when they're going to kill Tom Parazov. He's going to die safe. Oh no, they both lived. Like, yeah, it does seem very padded because there are no actual consequences. It's just excitement for its own sake. It's true.
I don't know. I feel it's a little weird because I don't feel like this episode is self-aware enough to realize it's doing this, but there is a certain, I mean, because I don't really understand the relationship between the Ocampans and the Caretaker. I do kind of get it, but I'm still not completely clear about like exactly what happened, why the Caretaker would be able to do this. Like what's going on here? What are the Kazon? What's going on with them? And there is an element to it, which I like because it's confusing because our main characters don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But the show doesn't, this script in particular doesn't seem to be aware that that's what it's doing. Well, it seems unclear because the script seems unclear about what's happening. It doesn't seem unclear because our cast members don't know what's going on.
Well, I guess, here's my question. With the Kazon, actually, that's are they going to be one of the is it a case where the crew sees them, they think they're this little desert power, they're just dealing with this one planet, they're not really going to be a major threat, but they piss them off, and it turns out they're actually one of the dominant powers in the Delta Quadrant, and they've made they're the Klingons of this, and they've made a powerful, at the end when he's like, you've made an enemy, are the Kazon going to reappear and has Janeway inadvertently pissed off a group that's going to cause her stress for the rest of the series, or are we never going to see these people again and it doesn't matter?
We do see the Kazon again.
Okay.
And they do become a recurring threat. For a while.
That's at least, if it doesn't have to be the full series. And I know one thing I do know is that the Borg do appear in this.
Oh, yes, they do.
Yeah. So I assume we're going to go very much into Borg shit eventually. But is it the kind of thing where then for example, just as in DS9, the Cardassians and the Maquis were kind of the early things, but it blossomed into the Dominion. I assume we're going to be starting with the Kazon, and then the Borg are going to start being more.
One of the things about Star Trek Voyager that they wanted to do was give an opportunity for a clean slate, get away from all of the alien species that have been developed over the 30 years of Star Trek that had been previous to this, and eventually what they do is it turns into the Borg show, which is a little disappointing, but it's. I don't want to give them a pass for that, but I also don't want to say that. It's very difficult to come up with, iconic villains that or even just alien species that are going to be able to grow and change and be really good developed over the course of a series or over a franchise. And, TNG certainly had false starts. DS9 certainly had false starts. And Voyager's going to have false starts.
Well, I guess I do feel like Kazon is pretty much Klingon with the serial numbers filed off, and both in their look and in their name. I don't know it, and
which is a problem, I think.
And it doesn't. I assume they aren't setting us up for the ultimate revelation that the Kazon and the Klingon are the same species, except throughout. Yeah, so.
It's a little bit of a failure of imagination, and I think that they recognize that. One of the things that I've always liked about everyone that worked on Star Trek Voyager is they're very open to say when they made mistakes and what they were doing wrong, and the Kazon are one of them. It's weird because I never actually picked up on this when I was watching the show, but there is a throwaway line in this episode that they're a sect of the Kazon. They're the Kazon Ugla.
Okay.
And there's this whole idea that the Kazon are not really a unified empire that we're used to seeing, like the Romulans or the Cardassians or whoever. They are more akin to gangs.
Okay.
And so there's all these different sects of Kazon.
Kind of like the Orion Syndicate, for example.
Sort of like that, yeah. And they don't really they don't do a great job with that. And so when the Kazon eventually go away, it's not necessarily that we're sad to see them go, and I'll just leave it at that.
And I assume it's not a big, it's not a seasons long arc that we're,
But in terms of, well, I wouldn't say that either. In terms of how these alien races stack up to ones that you've seen before, I mean, we've talked about the Kazon, we've talked about the Ocampa a little bit. There's the two main alien races that we see in this episode. We don't know what species Neelix is at this point. Are they memorable in any way? Do you feel like, for example, the Kazon are you intrigued to find out more about the Kazon?
I mean, I guess I'm hoping that the Kazon become interesting, but I mean, I keep wanting to call them the Opacas. I don't know what you just literally just said their name, and
the Ocampas,
the Opacas. Oh my god! No, really, like they just took other names and they just rearranged them.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised if beyond Kess we never see any of them again, and that would be fine. I wouldn't care, and because they're the aliens of the week, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't bother me that in Next Generation they're always going to a different planet, and we're not going to see that species ever again. Occasional ones, but we'll have run-ins with the Kazon, and they'll be kind of a major, or we'll meet Neelix's people, for example. But again, given that the scope of the show is they're going southwest and they're just gonna come up upon stuff, and eventually, we can assume that by season 5 they're going to be much further along than they were in the first season, and so it almost seems set up to have all of these things that they leave behind, and I'm not bothered by that again because it's I'm okay if we have a bunch of good adventures now. We did just get through Deep Space Nine. It's okay to have. I guess my biggest hope for Voyager is that it becomes a fun show.
Yeah, I think it is. I certainly there's periods of the show that are not as fun, and I actually think that the Michael Piller seasons are the weakest. He was doing a very particular type of Star Trek, telling particular types of stories that we've seen a lot of this stuff before, and I get the impulse to do something different. I get the impulse to not go too much into the characters in the pilot because, Deep Space Nine was this very, very mystical character-oriented pilot. I just don't, I don't know that the way that they told this story was that interesting. And again, I think we haven't really talked about the Caretaker, and I think that, it is just one of those things where you look at it and you say, okay, well, this is just a Star Trek story of the week. Whereas if you look at the pilot of DS9, you had the Prophets, you had the Bajorans, you had the Cardassians, you had all these sort of like intertwining stories that were obviously going to be spun out and continued on and on and on. Whereas you're right, like this is a very different show. This is a show. Deep Space Nine was stationary. It was a show that had to create recurring characters because they were staying on the space station and it would seem weird otherwise. Voyager is not that show. Voyager is almost the complete opposite of that. It is, again, a space show. It's a ship show, but they're not just aimlessly exploring. They have a direction they're going in. And you're right. They're going to be leaving a lot of stuff behind because they're consistently moving in one direction.
It's not incidental that the last show is named after a space station. This is literally called Voyager. It's literally a voyage.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think that's incidental. And I think that's a really great point. And so, at the end of the day, I think that, Janeway's decision to, some of it is I think strong. And I think that part of it is just that I don't know that they're selling it well enough. I mean, she makes a decision to blow up the Caretaker array because she feels like that is the right thing to do. It's a little, I feel like it's a little, well, paternalistic isn't the right word, but it's a little parental on her part to make that decision on behalf of the Ocampans, just as it was paternalistic or parental of the Caretaker to do that.
Yeah, she falls into the same trap she critiqued the guy 5 minutes ago for.
Yeah, and I also feel like there's not enough argument on the bridge when she makes that decision.
Yeah.
And that is the one false note of the pilot, really, for me. Everything else I can forgive as rough.
Yes.
I don't think there's anything internally consistent with what they do. That, to me, feels like there should have been a much bigger argument. And they kind of allied it by Chakotay saying, well, she's the captain, so she makes that decision for us. And it's like, dude, she's not your captain. You're a Maquis.
Especially because, again, they have to deal with the fact that they aren't quite dealing enough with the fact that they really are alone. Because if they had gone through this exact situation in the Alpha Quadrant, what would end up happening? They would send a team of Federation people onto this planet to deal with the Okapa and to help them learn to be self-sufficient.
Sure,
They have 5 years until so the Federation is going to, and yes, there is no Federation. It's either them and they don't want to stay there until the Okapa are learn to become self-sufficient. But again, you would think that that should be mentioned.
I mean, I do. It should be mentioned.
I would have rather that they cut out the, saved Chakotay from the falling stairs,
Well, I think you're right. I think that you're already seeing the tension of the show, which is that, part of the reason why I like Star Trek is that it does ask these very sort of hard philosophical questions about what the right thing to do is. And I think that in this episode, especially, the whole setup of Janeway deciding to destroy the Caretaker array and their only chance to get home, there's no real examination of whether or not that's the right decision to make because it's so wrapped up in this action-adventure template. And, I don't know if it was the right decision. I mean, maybe it was, but she basically makes the decision because she doesn't want the Caretaker array to fall into the hands of the Kazon.
Yeah.
And she's protecting the Ocamp, and it's a whole, needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few thing. And obviously Starfleet and the Federation does believe in that philosophy very strongly. But I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more discussion of that in the episode.
I mean, I frankly would have liked them. I don't know why they didn't end up just hanging out by the array for another week. Again, Janeway's a scientist. She's not interested in looking at this technology and trying to figure it out, and maybe they can figure out a way to repair it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at least worth a shot. Even if they can't fix it, maybe they could learn a little bit of something. Maybe they can learn something to make their ship go faster. It's not like the Kazon were about to come the next day or something. I didn't get the sense that there was a time limit that they had to destroy it now or never.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, not a completely successful pilot, but it sounds like you're at least interested to see more. And, that's all a pilot is really designed to do. So
I guess where I feel a little let down is learning that what brought them there is a little arbitrary. It's not as if the main plot were to deal with the Caretaker and to figure out what their civilization was and are there other planets that are dealing with
No, they're not interested in that.
Yeah.
It is a Deus Ex Machina of it's just, it is. Well, before we wrap this episode up, I mean, the one, and I saved the best for last, how you feeling about Tuvok? Okay. I like him. I think Tim Russ gives a really good performance as a Vulcan.
Yeah. We were talking a couple weeks ago about people playing Vulcans poorly and people playing them well, and I think I can definitely see that he is feeling emotions, especially, for example, when she's talking about, your family, they were worried about you. Well, that's illogical. Well, they miss you. And he's like, yeah, I miss them. That is maybe he isn't willing to admit worry, but he does still admit attachments and missing and feeling lonely and those kind of a thing. And again, that's very different even from Spock, who was probably a little older than I think Tuvok is intended to be.
No, younger.
Younger? Spock was younger.
In the original series?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Tuvok's supposed to be like 100 years old.
Oh. Well, then never mind.
Yeah. Which isn't clear in the episode to be.
Okay. And
so I'm not criticizing you for not knowing that.
And I might also be going with seeing Tuvok last night at the very beginning of his series with, my image of Spock, and the most recently I've seen Spock was him, as in the movies, for example. So, obviously I'm thinking of an older Leonard Nimoy and a younger Tim Russ.
Yeah.
So that's probably part of my.
Yeah, that's certainly true as well. Yeah. Well, we are ready to go on this voyage with all of you.
Oh.
We will reveal what we're talking about next week. But before we do that, if you have any thoughts on the pilot episode of Star Trek Voyager Caretaker, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at TrekAboutShow.com. You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TrekAboutShow, which supports this podcast and our other podcasts tuning in. We are moving along with the X-Files. This week, we're talking about the episodes The Jersey Devil and Shadows. So go over to tuninginshow.com and check those out in 2 days and subscribe, and you'll get those in your podcatcher of choice when they are released. Social media, we're on at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Trekabout Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for Trekabout, like Ajax Boogie, who left us one a few days ago. And once again, it's a straight person upset that gay people have opinions that are not straight people's opinions. So he or she says, these guys love Star Trek, yet constantly have problems with everything about it. I don't think that's true.
Well, you know how people who are younger can't understand critiquing something you like.
They say they love the progressive message of Star Trek, but are offended by the straights. This podcast was about Star Trek, and around season 4 of DS9, it became a springboard for self-victimized commentary and open hostility toward heterosexuals. I wanted Star Trek and got LGBTQ Fox News. So this is ridiculous on its face. I don't think that I've ever said that I'm offended by straight people.
That's the right-wing word of choice. They think that getting, critiquing something is offense when, especially, right-wingers are fucking babies.
It's very possible that Milo left this comment.
Fagonopolis?
Yeah.
Can I say Fagonopolis? I can say it.
You can say it. I want to read this because really this is our opportunity to put this to bed. I'm not saying we're never going to talk about LGBT issues on this podcast ever again because, we are two gay men and we're living in Trump's America. But for me, what this boils down to, and Richard and I had a clarifying talk about this off mic a few days ago, but straight people are not generally, and I say generally because there certainly are a lot of straight people that are very self-aware that I enjoy very much, are not generally speaking sort of equipped or used to examining themselves in the same way that a lot of minorities are. And minorities of all stripes have to come to terms with the ways in which their subculture interacts with the larger culture. And when you are a part of the larger culture and you have no subculture, you're not used to hearing other viewpoints. And so I think that is the spirit in which I bring this kind of thing up on the podcast. And I'm disappointed that we have apparently offended this person. But I would also like to say that I don't care.
So you're not super disappointed. You're gonna you're not losing sleep over it. Yeah. There has been a lot written about people who looking at the other, right? So the other in this case being gay men. The subject who is looking at the other, who is heterosexuality, is not used to being the object of analysis. And a lot of times that can make people very uncomfortable with that. I mean, I don't know. We're looking at Star Trek as an object of analysis. And for us, we see we are going to take this from a queer perspective. If you don't like it, there are, go listen to Mission Log. And, if you really don't like it, give us $1,000 to our Patreon, and we will change our content to fit you.
$1,000,
$1,000 a month.
I would say more like.
No, I'd say changing is worth $12,000.
Really? I would like both of us to make a yearly salary on that if we're going to change our content. If we're going to sell out, let's sell out.
Okay, fine. If you want to sell out, make us an offer that should be 6 figures, and then we will change to meet your nice little straight worldview, which we will not challenge whatsoever. Yeah. You're right. Love Actually is a great movie. The reunion is not considered a hate crime. You know what? I'm really happy there was a Will and Grace reunion on.
Yeah.
You know what the world needs? A Queer Eye for the Straight Guy reboot. You are right, everybody.
Well, next week we are continuing our journey into Star Trek Voyager by talking about the episodes Parallax and Time and Again.